Karen.
Hi Karen, how are you?
Fine, how are you?
Good. Hey, is Karen not today?
Next week.
Well, you said 14th.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Oh, my God. No, the 21st. It's like we have it every other week. I've been so damn busy. I need to get rid of the Rotary group. So I'm so sorry. No, not.
Look at Karen. Look at Karen.
We'll be back. All right, bye.
See you next week.
Hello.
Hey,
I'm gonna have him. Have another secretary for Rotary these days.
how are you, Karen?
Going crazy, apparently.
Well, that's okay. You know, we're all doing the best we can for sure.
I know. No, I made a mistake and told our caterer today, not next week. So anyway,
Uh-oh.
whoops,
Who did we have coming?
we're a flaming skewer.
Oh, shoot.
They're okay. They'll haul it back and serve it as a special tonight, I guess. I don't know what they'll do.
Yeah,
But
rats.
try it next week. So
Felt like I should be on here early in case Sandy came and had any questions, our speaker.
yep.
Do you have it set that others can, oh, we have disabled screen sharing. Can we enable screen sharing?
I just did.
Okay, let me try again. Yep, now I do.
Yep.
Between my clicks.
Yep. Well, just hadn't got that part. Okay. I have to remember that, folks. All righty. Screen share. And Katie's on. Hi, Katie.
Morning. How's everybody?
We're good.
Good.
They're on mute.
Okay, well, I think we're ready to get started. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to your October, gosh, I still can't believe it's October 14th, Monday noon Rotary meeting. Online today, obviously. So we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Does anyone know of anyone in our Rotary family that could use some extra thoughts at the moment? Okay, well, as always, this is a tough season with weather all across the country, so keep those in your thoughts. We'll take just a second. Okay. Thank you. Karen, I didn't have a chance to look at the PowerPoint beforehand, but do I have anything else I should be sharing? I think that was a no, but no. Okay, perfect. All right, then Kristen, I'm going to kick it over to you to introduce our speaker for today.
Sounds great. Thank you. Good morning,
Yes.
everyone. We have continued our focus for the month of October. Again, that's on Economic and Community Development Month. So all of our programs will center around that topic. Last week, we had Megan Grettinger of Sci Starters join us talking about entrepreneurship that program is building with current Iowa State students and alum. And I know that the program has been communicated out by email. So if you weren't able to join us in person last week, check that out. It was really interesting to learn about what Sci Starters is doing. Next week, we'll have Travis Tolliver, the Vice President of Downtown Development. We're back in person at the Plex on the 21st. And then we'll wrap up our October spotlight with our own club economic and community development focus with John Dahlhoff presenting on Polio Plus and Katie talking about her international Rotary trip. That leaves today's program, of course. It's now my honor to introduce Sandy Ehrig, who is going to be presenting with us today on the Iowa Rural Development Council's work. Sandy has retired after a 40-year career at Iowa Farm Bureau. She led the Renew Rural Iowa work there as an economic development administrator. And prior to that stop, Sandy held positions in local, regional, and state economic development organizations. Sandy recently co-chaired the statewide Empower Rural Iowa initiative along with Lieutenant Governor Adam Gregg. She continues as a past chair and honorary member for the Iowa Rural Development Council board currently. Sandy also helps her own community of Nevada as a councilwoman and happily assists with the Ames Regional Economic Alliance with facilitation needs in that community as well. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Sandy Ehrig.
Well, great. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you all for joining this noon. Really excited about your theme this month, as my whole career has really been in community and economic development. It kind of sounded like I did 40 years at Farm Bureau, and I have to clear that up with I actually started my career in Jefferson, and I understand Carol Custer's in your group. So you have a little Jefferson connection there. I was the Community Economic Development Director there, and then recruited by the State Economic Development Agency to serve in a new program. It was a certification program where I had half the state, which western half of the state was my territory, working with those local chambers of commerce and economic development groups. So firsthand, it's pretty hard to stump me on the roads of western Iowa. I've been to many of those rural places, things that set me up for my interest in the Rural Development Council that we'll get to in a few minutes. From there, I had the chance to work with 5 rural electric cooperatives. Some of you may be familiar with the Iowa Area Development Group, which has been around a long time as the economic development arm that works with the rural electric cooperatives and the rural telcos. So that was so successful that 5 of those rural electrics wanted someone to work, or a couple of us, to work exclusively just for their areas. So worked with local economic development efforts, state economic development efforts, and utility, went back to the state and managed the entire community development division, which includes all the infrastructure programs, water, sewer, those sorts of infrastructure, housing, and also Main Street, which certainly has touched Ames in a really big way, and also tourism. So many different factions of community development. And then finally, as noted, I wrapped up at Farm Bureau. So I'm going to start with that. I want to talk today about what are the issues that have changed in economic development organizations that gets us to the Rural Development Council in a big way. So at Farm Bureau, as was noted, the entrepreneurial business was the issue. How do we help startups? And at that time, and this is about 15 years ago now, the mission of Farm Bureau always was to create a vibrant future for agriculture and farm families, but they also added, and their communities figured out, we can't move the land, so we better help figure out how to assist those communities. So that became part of that mission, certainly, and the way that they decided they could help with vibrancy of rural communities was by working with entrepreneurial business development. So that was my work with Renew Rural Iowa, and that program continues. You heard that I've retired. Actually, my desk just got cleaned out at the beginning of this year, 2024. So I hung around as long as I could and still like it. Obviously, I'm still active in many ways in my own place. But back to Renew Rural Iowa, what are the tenets? How do you inspire entrepreneurialism? Well, we decided education was kind of the bait. Like, how do you find those people that are starting up a business or in a business that they want to expand? So the bait, and it still continues, is a workshop called The Journey to Your Vision. And it's a chance that's underwritten by Farm Bureau. 2 great experts, Mike Kleiss and Joel Bennett, are the presenters and work with the companies on that, working on their business. So those workshops are coming up. If you know of people that should be involved. There are 3 yet this year, and they purposely move around the state, typically in rural places. So Pella is the next one, I believe, October 22nd, and then Manchester, November 19th, and Montrose, December 13th. So I know it sounds like you had a program last week or last meeting on entrepreneurship. So this definitely ties in with that. So this is always done with partners like CIRUS, Center for Industrial Research and Service at Iowa State, and also the Small Business Development Centers statewide. So it's been a really great success in a way to introduce those businesses to other resources that can help them. The next aspect of Renew Rural Iowa has been mentoring and connecting them with the resources. A lot of times you just need a door to enter if you're starting a business or trying to expand and figure out who can help me, what are the resources. So we were one of those doors and are still one of those doors. So mentoring and connection is a big aspect of the program. And of course, financing, everybody starts with that usually. Well, where's the money? Who can help me financially with my business? And in the case of Farm Bureau, the Rural Vitality Funds were created about 20 years ago as an investment fund that does help and has helped a number of startups and expanding businesses across the state. And another familiar, I would hope, Ag Startup Engine at the university is another program that we were really involved with, and it serves as a conduit between those early stage ag startups and investors. And it's at the ISU Research Park, really focused on often Iowa State students or Iowa State alums that are working in that ag space. So it's been quite a success. The next issue that gets me to the Rural Development Council is that very thing of community vitality. Not every economic development organization, or most actually, for years did not see community development as part of their work. They considered economic development to be industrial development. Are we building industrial parks? Are we attracting new industry? Are we working with our existing industries to grow? And as we've noted, workforce shortage has been a really big issue in our state, all over, quite honestly, for the last several years. And we figured out it also has to be about attracting people and not just the business and industry. How do we attract people so we have people to work in these companies that are the economic engines of our communities? So the rural community vitality, there was a new focus on that. So Iowa Rural Development Council has been around since 1992, and it was created as part of the Farm Bill by an executive order in 1992, and received federal funding for many years and in Iowa, and was not only federal but also state funding, and was staffed and housed at the Iowa Department of Economic Development at that time. Well, in 2005 rather, both the state and federal funding for that group was dissolved. And so our organization then operated without staff and really quite informally. I called it show and tell. The members of the Rural Development Council were people like me that had resources, like I could represent the resources at state government or the resources at Farm Bureau. At the meetings, we had people from the universities and community college and rural USDA, just a number of usual suspects, but none of us necessarily specifically in agriculture or rural development. So what happened in 2015, we were putzing along. 2015, I believe I must have missed a meeting in the summer of 2015 because I was elected chairperson for the Iowa Rural Development Council and held that position through 2020. And my mantra was that we really needed to connect the communities with our resources. It was great for us to come together and network and talk about it, but it would sure make more sense if we, got those resources out there and connected with the communities. And we've had what I consider 3 really big wins in those years and continuing now as we kind of rethought our role as the Rural Development Council, starting with a rural summit, thinking if we get the communities to come to us and have a worthwhile session, workshop with best practices and some outside expertise, wouldn't that be, that will be the test, I guess, was where we were at. So in 2016, back to Jefferson, we were filling the casino at the event center there with invited communities, and we were very strategic about what communities we invited to. It wasn't one of our statewide kinds of y'all come. We were determined to have communities that were showing some interest and success in growing and improving. We had the other unique thing was that we invited them to have teams of 3, not just come one at a time, but we know things don't change or improve unless 3 people want to go home and talk about it. And it was also a way for them to share some car time and do some networking on their own. So 3 leaders from each community, when we ended up with 75 different communities attending on a snowy Friday in November. I remember it well because it wasn't a fun day to drive to Jefferson. But it was so worthwhile, and we also had a chance for exhibitors. So those same resource people that I've been talking about, it actually kind of sparked a resurgence in their interest too among those rural advocates, and convinced us that we have some really important partners, including federal and state agencies, the regents, institutions, the community colleges, the utilities, some other nonprofits, statewide organizations like the Iowa Bankers Association and the Association of Business and Industry, and others participating that had some aspect of their work involved in rural, made them want to be, kind of help us revitalize the council's ability and figure out, really rural is cool. It's a good thing, and really brought the stature and the interest in rural community development with some new momentum and also some new investors, which allowed us to get back into staffing. We were able to hire Bill Menner, and Bill continues to be the executive director for the Iowa Rural Development Council. Bill was the former USDA state director, and also he resides in Grinnell, where his wife is a professor at Grinnell College. And he was also the Poweshiek County Economic Development Director until 2018, when we hired him for the Rural Development Council. Well, these summits have been quite the hit. So from Jefferson, we knew we had to do it again, and we wanted to stay in rural places. So we went to Grinnell in 2017 and 2018 with the summit, expanded it to a day and a half, and also the people went away. I don't know what's going on.
We can still hear you. We can still hear you, Sandy.
All right, I'll just keep tucking away. So the Grinnell Summit was extra special because we were in the Hotel Grinnell, which, if you're not familiar, you'll want to check that out. A great model of what rural communities can do that, is a really special place. Had been an elementary, middle school for a time, and now it's this wonderful boutique hotel, which is unique to have a gymnasium and an auditorium. So perfect for this type of event. But we outgrew it and moved ourselves on to Kirkwood Community College for 2019, 2020. Like most of the world, our summit was virtual. But the Kirkwood also served in a very special way, with emphasis on entrepreneurship there, with culinary arts and hospitality. So we could showcase some unique things at that summit. And most recently, 2021 and planned for 2025 as well, we'll be at the Gateway in Ames. So the last several years, we've been in Ames and showcased a lot of things that are going on at the university and things that really impact our rural efforts. So April 10th and 11th are the dates for the 2025 Rural Summit. So a really big win, I think, for the Iowa Rural Development Council. And I see Mark Edelman on the lineup here. And Mark was a major leader and proponent of the success too. So very helpful. And somebody's asking about how is rural community defined, size, and other qualifiers. Well, we've batted that around so much that we've just kind of gone with, 15,000 or less has been our own definition based on just conversations and our own work. There's so many different ones. The federal money comes through to communities 50,000 or less. So to have any federal dollars, you have to fit that qualification. USDA has different qualifications in that way. And some communities self-define themselves, so that's fine too. If you consider yourselves rural, you're in. Moving on, the second win, then I'd say for the Iowa Rural Development Council, I thought maybe I'd see Troy Weary in this group, but Troy is with ITC Midwest, resides in Ames and office there. He approached us, the Iowa Rural Development Council, back when we were at the Kirkwood in Cedar Rapids area, to create a grant program with ITC Midwest, where we combine some funding with the Rural Development Council with a different kind of approach. They were seeing projects in their work that needed some engineering or some sort of facilitation, some soft skill kinds of things. So in 2019, we worked with them to launch the Power of Connection, and that continues to grow and be a very popular program because you get technical assistance. It's not, you lead with technical assistance with a team of experts from the Rural Development Council, meeting with folks that have a project that, the money in this case, and I guess this one does have a population requirement under 10,000. The grant potential is up to $5,000 for their project, but the unique thing, I think, is the soft costs. We're not doing bricks and mortar like often you're doing in economic development work. In this one, if they need some engineering, if they need some other assistance, as I said, those are eligible kinds of costs. So their company loves it, and if it's a community that's not in their area, the Rural Development Council funds the grant. So it's been a really great win-win with both organizations working together. Bill Menner manages it and facilitates it. So the administrative piece is coming out of the Rural Development Council. Well, our third win, it was mentioned in my introduction, the Empower Rural Iowa program. The winner there was we have statewide staff now for rural economic development, which we had never had somebody just devoted to working with rural revitalization. And that person is Robin Bostrom, and she is at the IEDA, Iowa Economic Development Authority, and her office is called the Center for Rural Revitalization. Empower Rural Iowa started in 2018 when the governor created this program by executive order. And when we saw that presentation, or that announcement, I should say, in her State of the Union address that year, our Rural Development Council executive board fired off a message like, we'd sure like to meet with you. We were concerned that she was going to create another organization that looked like what we were already doing. And at that point, our traction was pretty good. So we were excited to talk to her about how could we work together on that effort. And consequently, the Rural Development Council was written into that executive order as a co-chair responsibility and working closely, and it's been really great. I was the first to co-chair with the Lieutenant Governor, and just most recently wrapped that up at the end of 2023. And it continues. I'm not sure now that the Lieutenant Governor has a new position. Obviously, the program will continue, but it will be whoever is named into that role, I would think. And from the Rural Development Council, Carla Isink, who is the Economic Development folks for person director from Marion County, so Pella Knoxville area, if you're not familiar with the counties, has assumed that co-chair role that I had. The way it started was people were invited to apply to be in the Empower Rural Iowa Task Force lineup. And there were 3 task forces initially, one dealing with connectivity, broadband specifically, that has been really successful. That one probably has had the most positive legislative activity around the need for broadband. And if there was a good thing that came out of 2020 and all of our shutdown issues, it was the need for broadband, the need for connectivity in rural places as well as everywhere else. So a lot of success there. Another task force growing was charged with working on leadership and strategic planning. And I'll talk about that work in a second. And investing was, their role was to work with housing. Again, a statewide issue. Actually, another one of those definitely Midwest issues. Like, we haven't replaced housing stock as frequently or as robustly as some other things that we've been working on, but there's a lot of attention on it now, so that's changing. So out of that work came some really, what were the barriers? There was education in those meetings. There was a lot of discussion, a lot of consensus building about what needs to happen, and also recommendations that went to the governor's office to come forward to the legislature, hopefully, and it did. Out of that work, rural housing assessments and childcare assessments, and those activities are still going strong, but there are resources, financial resources in many communities working on that. Iowa State took the lead. Iowa State Extension is in the lead role with the housing assessments and working with teams. It's different, we hear about housing studies and they often just go on the shelves of many communities and often happens just through city government. Well, the purpose of this assessment was to put together a broader team representative of business and real estate and government and all of the entities that have a stake, the stakeholders in housing development, the contractors, getting to the builder aspect as well. So putting those folks together in a room to discuss what are the barriers, what's our history in housing, what's our future, what kinds of housing are we talking about? Housing is such a big topic. Are we single family housing? Are we talking about multifamily? Are we talking about infill housing? So all the, figuring out and developing a plan that more than one entity was subscribing to. So that's been very helpful. And the same then, of course, childcare, what fell right along in line with housing as far as a need, not just rural Iowa, but really all over our state. So we've seen some real movement in that area too, with the similar, since that model worked really well, with a similar kind of assessment for communities to figure out what are their assets for childcare, what's already existing, inventorying existing childcare, and then making adjustments and doing the things that they need to do. And again, these are both all ongoing things. Rural Innovation Grant was also created because of this work, and it's focused on grocery. We've heard a lot about food deserts in our state, and what are we doing about that? One of the most creative projects, Lenox, Iowa, has a really cool couple that bought the grocery. They sing, it's sort of like the Seattle fish market, I think. They sing in the grocery store and kind of dance around. I mean, it's entertaining as well as deliver food. And they're the first people that set up food lockers in communities that have no food, where you can have a locker, order your food online, and the next morning the food's in the locker. So, how do you keep a rural grocery going? So some innovative kinds of things like that under the guise of Rural Innovation Grant. So the 3 areas that have been funded, that rural grocers, rural food processors, and economic gardening, which is the economic development style or entrepreneurial development style of work happening locally in many of our communities now. And that grant was like $5,000, and it is specifically for equipment or technology. So a different need for those communities with innovation. And one more, Rural Boost, is another new program that came out of this work, where expert teams from whatever the needs are for a specific project, they're really developing a focused plan in a community that applies for this. And it gets them to next steps for growth. These are bigger grants, like up to $20,000 for this sort of boost work that's pretty intense, and it's more than a couple of meetings involved with that. Finally, I mentioned the importance of leadership and strategic planning, and we have a leadership exchange that the Rural Development Council actually manages this on behalf of Empower Rural Iowa. Many of you may be familiar with ABI's Leadership Iowa program that's been around for a long time and perhaps been participants yourselves. ABI at one point, probably about 10 years ago, also hosted a workshop for communities that had existing leadership programs, or those that are associations that had leadership staff and programs, to share best practices. So the idea of a leadership exchange. So we spoke with them a bit about their plans to continue that, and they were delighted to work with the Rural Development Council to make this happen and empower rural Iowa. So we are about to have the 5th annual, this has worked really well, 5th annual leadership exchange. So if any of you that work with associations where you're promoting leadership development and want to hear and be involved with best practices, it looks like a really great lineup. It's in Perry, October 29th through the 30th. And I think the registration may stop this week. So look up Leadership Exchange, or you can shoot me a little message afterwards and I'll get you the contact information. But it's really a great, again, this one's a day and a half, maybe even 2 full days this time, typically a day and a half. So what have we learned about rural development with all this stuff? No, I guess one thing we've learned is what makes a small town special. And one thing that makes a small town special, just taking right off from that leadership, are those leaders. It's really critical. I've often been asked, well, why is this town so much cooler than that town? And they're doing so many things. Well, it's because they have leaders that they're deliberately making things happen. We can't just wait for transitions to happen. We're in an election year, that's all we hear right now all the time. But in our local communities, it's really important too that we consider our leadership teams, and not just, I'm on my city council, not just that, but our economic development organizations, our chambers, thinking about and being involved in recommending or participating yourselves in those leadership roles is really critical. Another thing that we know makes a small town special is they have a vision. They know what they're about, what they want to do, what their future holds for them, and how they're going to get there. And we also know that it takes the whole community, or as many people as you can have that want to participate. It also takes a positive attitude. So that might leave out a few, but that participatory community decision-making is really important. How do you do that? We get surveyed to death, but, focus groups, there are lots of, different ways that you can be creative with getting input for decision-making. And that investing in the future, are we passing bond issues? In successful small towns, we're passing bond issues. We're looking to the future. We're also supporting our local businesses. So leaders, vision, community, and then finally passion. Is there evidence of community pride? Can we see, you can tell when you drive around a community if there are flowers planted and the streets look pretty good and there's some banners and maybe some music playing and it looks like businesses are open and houses aren't dilapidated. Those kinds of things, the visual evidence of community pride is really important when we talk about Does it look successful or not? And you can get that feel pretty fast. And that can-do attitude that I mentioned is really critical as well. So what are the barriers to success? What's holding us back? Well, often we think it's risk, it's too risky, or we lack the capacity, we don't have the resources, we lack the capacity, or we don't have the knowledge that it takes, or we can't reach consensus, we can't agree on anything. Well, all of that leads me to discuss one more really critical issue that we've just really figured out in the last few years, and that's regional economic development. To address risk and resources and knowledge and consensus building, sometimes we need to look to a larger organization like the Ames Regional Economic Development Alliance. They have been so successful in the last 5 or so years with or other communities coming to them. We can't force regional economic development, but it sure is work. When people see success, they want to be part of it. And I can speak from my experience with Nevada, who reached out to Ames to have a conversation about, as they were looking at restaffing their Nevada Economic Development Commission, how could they do that with the umbrella of Ames? And it's been so successful. Now they're working with Boone, and then most recently, Hamilton County has reached out. So I think it says a lot about those barriers to success we may be overcoming by just looking within our own region, working together more closely. I think it's a great model statewide that does diminish those risks for successful rural community development. And I think most of all, I would really want to thank all of you. I think that all of you have some role in the support of the work that I've described and what's going on locally. And if not, your participation and interest in the service of Rotary is one of those positive things. It's when we talk about community, it is our service clubs that are a big piece of that too. How do we organize and give back in a productive, constructive way? So that's the story of rural development from my desk today.
If you have questions for Sandy, we can put them into chat, or if you're feeling particularly shy today and you want me to ask your question, you can send that to me via a private message. Sandy, thank you so much for sharing with us the many things that you've learned over your career in rural development and economic development. One thing that I'm curious about, what about rural healthcare? We hear a lot about critical access hospitals and how some different specialties are changing or services are not being offered at critical or at rural hospitals anymore. What's kind of the landscape that you've seen, and what are some of the newest solutions in that?
One of the things that I didn't mention that Empower Rural Iowa has been really involved with is a new effort with first aid, like having more people trained. And the Lieutenant Governor saw a program that he brought to Iowa that we have a few pilots going right now. But the idea is it's kind of like the Uber for healthcare. We never have enough EMTs, emergency services, and especially for rural. So how can we have, more people with a first aid level of training that can be first on site for an emergency? And so, as I say, kind of it's an app like Uber. And so you can see the proximity where you're located if you're one of the folks that's trained, if you can take the call or not. But I haven't heard the results are not in yet, but I know that we have 3 different pilots, and one that I could follow up with a little more information on how that's going. But I think it's one of the ideas that seems like helpful in that arena and the EMT folks love it. is another aspect of having more people that can be helpful initially. The Iowa Rural Health Association has been part, they participate with us, but there is a whole association just around, devoted to rural health. And it happens that Bill Menner was also their director for a time. He has stepped away from that most recently, but, knowing that there definitely is interest organization around it. I think everybody's working to solve that. It goes back to that leadership, even locally, the trustees for those facilities. You have to have the right leaders that are, pulling together and working on how do they find solutions and minimize the risks of their work.
Maybe not even a fair question for you, but thanks for your thoughts. And actually, now I'm just going to pepper you a little bit.
That's okay.
Because the whole like Uber for first aid idea seems so wild, and yet maybe it's working. Are there other really wild things out there that are being considered by the group, or are there other states that have really honed in on some maybe innovative ideas that you think would work well here in Iowa too?
Well, that's a good question. We just hosted the Partners for Rural America. We're just in Iowa for their annual, and that's the National Organization of Rural Development Councils. So I did go on their tour. A lot of this is show and tell too. So walking around, we started in Knoxville, where the veterans home once was, and now that's like a fabulous housing development with a splash park, and they're moderately priced housing, which affordable housing under 200,000 today is pretty much unheard of. With new, it's really been well done. And I believe the developer of that project is looking to work more in central Iowa. I know that he's made some contacts here. So, but what a great, transformation from buildings that had to come down. It was quite a campus if you'd never been there, old historic buildings that were all in pretty bad shape. So converting that to this beautiful park and housing area with, definitely the kinds of things that families would want to see. So I think, not so wild, not the ideas aren't so wild. That's why we do have that innovation grant too, because we want communities to think about things that aren't, traditionally the way that we've done them. Like, how can you be more innovative? And those are the kinds of models that we're really looking for.
Thanks, Sandy. Any questions from the group for Sandy today? Okay, with that, Sandy, please accept our gratitude for sharing with us all that you know, and I'll turn things over to Katie to close our meeting out.
Yes, thank you so much, Sandy. It was so interesting to hear so many different organizations and groups working on that, which I think we all love, being residents of Iowa. So that's really cool to hear. I will leave you with my kindness quote before we do the 4-way test. And the one I chose for today that I just love is that the smallest act of kindness is worth more than the greatest intention. So with that, if you'll join me in the 4-way test. I think I have it memorized, but of the things we think, say, or do, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? Go Cyclones! Have a great day, everybody.